2, 1. Good morning, and welcome to another morning talk. I think the next time we organise a retreat, we get somebody with those clipboards and go bang in front of me, so then we can record it. But anyway, for the time being, again, welcome to another talk. And for today's talk, I'm going to continue on from the 1,000-petal lotus simile. Please don't mind that this is not a simile which you find in the suttas or in the Vinaya of the Theravada Buddhist teachings, but nevertheless it is a very useful metaphor, and for a couple of reasons. And one is it shows you basically all you have to do is actually maintaining the mindfulness and the kindness on whatever you're watching. You don't really have to select what you're watching. As I said in one of those other similes, whatever's in front of you right now is the most important thing in the whole world. And so you give that meditation object priority, which means you're not choosing, which means you can be still, you can let go of this choice, which disturbs the mind. It even means that the excitement, the wow response, or the fear response hasn't got much of a ground to arise, which means you're just watching this moment, nice and peaceful, nice and calm. One of the other similes which I have given, I haven't mentioned it in this retreat, but I mention it very often, was a simile to try and describe what this thing we call the will is, what choice is. And that was a simile of the bus. And I gave this simile so many years ago, and I even called it at the time the driverless bus simile. And there was no driverless cars or buses or taxis in that time. A bit prescient of future times when there may be driverless vehicles. But this particular simile was using the metaphor that, life is a journey. Okay, you've heard that many times before, life is a journey. But you're like sitting on a bus, looking through the window. And sometimes your bus goes through very, very beautiful scenery. Nice rolling hills and waterfalls. And I don't know what else you like to feel as nice simile. I was really quite surprised once when I started investigating other religious teachings. And at that time, in the Islamic texts, they always described heaven as like rolling hills and grass and lots of water and lots of trees. And then the Christian texts, they described heaven as palm trees and beaches, not beaches, so lots of sand. In other words, the Europeans were describing heaven like what it looked like in the Middle East. And the Middle Easterns as were describing heaven as what it looked like in UK. It's all basically just what we don't have is what we want. But anyhow, looking at all of those, imagine that you're in a bus, you're looking through the window, and it's most beautiful scenery, all so comfortable and perfect and beautiful. And what happens in your bus? Your bus driver puts his feet down hard on the accelerator and increases speed. And you go out of the pleasant scenery of life far too quickly. And then what happens? And then, once you're out of the beautiful scenery, then you go into what I call the toxic waste dumps of life. You look through the window and it's really ugly and distressing. And when you look out through the window, it's ugly and distressing. What do you tell the bus driver to do? Put your feet harder down on the accelerator. Let's get out of here as soon as we can. And what does your bus driver do? Slows down. Even parks. And you say, you stupid bus driver, I want to get out of here as soon as I can. And obviously you get that metaphor. In life you have some wonderful experiences. They don't last long, do they? They tend to go too fast. And then it has some very difficult, painful, disappointing, distressing times in your life. And what does your bus driver do? Parks. So you have to stay there much longer than you should. So there's a problem in life. Can we find out how to instruct and teach our bus driver so that when life is difficult, they know how to get out fast? When it's beautiful, they know how to relax, park, so you can enjoy the happy times of life as much as you can. And you give instructions to the bus driver, but the bus driver takes no heed of your ideas and your desires and your instructions. So eventually you decide the only way to instruct that bus driver is go to find that bus driver and sit right next to him and teach him how to drive your bus. But first of all, you've got to find the bus driver. And that's what you do in meditation. The bus driver's seat is right deep inside. And eventually when you find that bus driver's seat, you have amazing insights. The shock of your life. You find the bus driver's seat is empty. There's no one there. That's why it doesn't follow your instructions. There's no one there. And so what's the result of that? You go back to your seat and you stop complaining. There's no one to complain to. In other words, you let go. No desire or ill will, no blaming, because you're out of control. You can't order your bus to go as fast as you like or as slow as you like. And so that idea of thinking you can control your meditation, you can do anything, is actually a mistake. Through choice, through force, or through what other people do, skillful means. It's another way of control freaking. You get all the skillful means and you apply them and think that's going to work. You waste a lot of time. And so instead of that, we go and sit back on our seat and relax. In meditation, I don't know about you, but I used to try hard. Honestly, I did. It never seemed to get me anywhere, never felt right. And I still remember the stories of some of my fellow monks. Not nuns. I think maybe the nuns were smarter. Was that the case? But some of these monks, some of these monks, I knew this one monk who decided, okay, let's go for broke. So he sat all night. Sat down and decided he wasn't going to move, no matter how painful it was. He said, well, just this is what you're supposed to do. Remember what the Buddha said. The Buddha said that he would sit down without adjusting his posture, without moving, until either he became fully enlightened or the blood in his veins dried up and the bones turned to dust. Have you heard that before? Have you ever tried it? I was just a young, arrogant student, about 18. I went to my first Wesak ceremony, and I was so inspired when I heard those words. And I thought, well, the Buddha, he was Indian, I'm English. The arrogance which people have. And anyway, I've got a good education. I can do this. I really wanted to get enlightenment out of the way. There's so many other things to do in life. So I sat down there and I made the vow, sat down. I should have mentioned to you, my maximum meditation time was about 30 minutes in those days. So I sat down, made myself comfortable and said to myself, resolved, I will not move from my seat until I am fully enlightened, or the blood in my body dries up and the bones turn to dust. Yeah. If the Buddha can do it, so can I. I actually made 40 minutes, a personal best. But I was really in agony. I couldn't stand it any longer. So I opened my eyes. First of all, I checked, no, I'm not enlightened. And number two, the blood was still flowing through my veins. It hadn't dried up. And my bones were still solid. And that was the first time. Fortunately, I only did that once. But other monks decided to, okay, give it a try. So remember this one monk, he meditated all night without moving. Without moving, just sitting there. And in the morning, the result was very inspiring. We had to send him to hospital for a double knee reconstruction. Yeah, no, I say that all too. That was crazy. But he thought, no, let's do it. There's another monk many years ago. This was when one of the long time ago first monasteries over in London. And he heard that the Buddha said that just these 3 robes, you don't need to take any more robes. And even the Buddha would go out into the cold nights and just wearing 3 robes, and that was sufficient to survive. So this monk went out onto Hampstead Heath in the middle of the winter time, at night time, just with his 3 robes. He survived, but he got double pneumonia and had to go to hospital for weeks. What was going on there? Your willpower didn't have any wisdom power. In these days, I tell the monks which I train, don't go for willpower, go for wisdom power. I know what the Buddha said. He just would sit without eating for days, was just so thin, and he said that didn't help him at all. If you want to check out the Buddha's story of how he became enlightened, I'll go back to the bus in a moment. When the Buddha became enlightened, that he reflected and he'd done all the ascetic practices, all the hard stuff like not eating, not moving, not even bathing. And then he thought he was getting nowhere. And then he remembered the time when he was a kid, 6 or 7 years of age, under the rose apple tree in India, while his father was doing a ceremony. And while his father was doing a ceremony, this young Siddhartha Gautama just closed his eyes and he entered into the first jhana experience. At the time he didn't know what it was, no one was telling him what it was. But then later on at this time, tried everything and couldn't get anywhere. And then he remembered that experience. And at that time it was the insight came up. Perhaps that is the way to enlightenment. And then the realization came, yes it is. Why am I afraid, he said, of the pleasure of those deep states, which have nothing to do with the sensory world? They're the pleasures of the 6th sense, the mind. With that realization, then he realized it was hard to get into those deep states of meditation with a body which is so tired and exhausted and in pain. So he rested, bathed, ate, and then, when his body was fit as it could be, it's never perfectly fit. You don't have to be perfectly fit and pain-free to get into these deep meditations, but it helps. And then he sat down in a place called Bodh Gaya and entered these 4 jhanas. The result of which, then the insights came. The first insight? This is called the Tevijja, the 3 insights of the Buddha. The first insight was rebirth. He could remember his previous lives. And when these things happen, because you've just emerged from a deep meditation, you don't have any doubt or any hindrances. You don't stretch the truth to fit yourself. You're actually perfectly honest in these places, in these times. You know you're perfectly honest. The trust is there because there's no doubt. So remember some of his previous lives. And this is not what the sutras say here, but what they say elsewhere. You know one of his previous lives? It's described in the Gatikara Sutta, in the Majjhima Nikaya. Many of you know this. In the Gatikara Sutta, our Buddha, so Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, he was recollecting that at the spot they just passed by, that he remembered a story from a past life there. This was the time when the previous Buddha was alive, called Kassapa, the Buddha. And he had a chief lay disciple called Gatikara. And Gatikara, he was a potter, very simple, and the only reason why he didn't ordain as a monk was because his parents were old and blind, and he was the only one who could look after them. So he remained a householder. But the Buddha confirmed that he was a non-returner. Now if you want to know what a non-returner is like, how to recognize them, you can see how Gatikara lived. Gatikara the potter, he would keep the 5 precepts, 8 precepts most of the time, and he would never dig the earth to get clay to make his pots. He always thought, if I put this shovel in the earth, there may be some bugs or some worms in there. I don't want to injure them. So he would wait until the farmers had dug the earth to make their dikes in the paddy fields, and he would just ask for some of that. Or use little bits of earth which were left over, dug up by mice or rabbits and stuff. And then when he would make his pots, he would never sell them. He would just put them on a bench outside his hut, saying, here are some pots, take one if you wish, and if you wish to leave me something to feed my blind old mum and dad, please leave some, not money, but leave some rice and beans just on the bench there. It was total barter. And he lived a very simple life. So if ever you see someone and they claim to be a non-returner, the 3rd stage of enlightenment, and they're still really worried about their bank account, there's some doubts that he had there. Such a simple lifestyle. And he had a friend called Jyotipala. Jyotipala was a student, and he was reasonably well-to-do, not like Gatikara. And Gatikara kept asking his best friend Jyotipala, come and see my teacher, Kassapa. Have you ever had that sort of trouble? You've got a husband or a really best friend, and you say, come and listen to some of this Buddhism or this meditation. I'm sure it will help you. I said, nah, I'm not into that sort of stuff. And that was like Jyotipala. And so Gatikara was really trying hard to convince his friend actually to go and visit Kassapa the Buddha. And his friend would say, what's the use of seeing that bald-headed good for nothing? And that's not a bad translation of what's actually in the text. If you look at it yourself, it wasn't praiseworthy at all. It was actually demeaning of Kassapa the Buddha. But nevertheless, the Gatikara eventually convinced his friend to at least go and visit his teacher, Kassapa. And he only did that, he said, let's go and bathe. And when his Jyotipala, his best friend's hair was all wet, Gatikara grabbed his hair. And you know that in the Asian tradition, you're not supposed to touch people's head. And grabbing your best friend's hair, so that you can't do that. He said, I'm doing that. I really want you to go and see Kassapa the Buddha, my teacher. And then was Jyotipala said, you go to such a length, this is really, what is it called, offensive even, to make me come and see Kassapa. Now this Kassapa must be something. So he went. And after he went to see Kassapa the Buddha, this bald-headed good-for-nothing, as he said before, he was so impressed that Jyotipala eventually ordained under him, took the precepts under him, became a bhikkhu under Kassapa the Buddha. And the story just says nothing more about what happened to Jyotipala after he ordained. Only the Buddha said, just to let you know, I was Jyotipala in the previous life. The Buddha, our Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, in that sutta, it's not just in some commentary somewhere or some weird text, he actually mentioned that he was that person who before couldn't even recognize the Buddha, who called him a good-for-nothing baldy. I like telling that story. It's right there in the suttas. And it's also confirmed in the Devaputta Samyutta. That's where there's a meeting between these two old friends. After the Buddha became enlightened, this heavenly being came to see the Buddha and said, just to let you know, this person has just become enlightened. And the Buddha, how do you know that? And he said, I'm Gatikara. No, I'm not Gatikara. Yeah, I'm Gatikara. In our previous life, we were best friends in the same village. You ordained and became the Buddha. Congratulations. I'm in the Sudawasa as a non-returner. And they said, beautiful, like two old friends, the Buddha and Gatikara, just met each other just after the Buddha's full enlightenment. Do you think I'm making that up? Go and have a look in some of the texts. It's right there. Why do I say that? Okay, here we go again. That was actually how the Buddha, would have that past experience. So as even a young kid, he could sit down under a rose apple tree without hardly any instructions and let go enough to actually experience the first jhana. And he forgot that for such a long time because people always assumed if you're going to get enlightened, you've got to be tough and letting go has to be painful. And the Buddha discovered that's not the case. And because of that, when the Buddha saw his first 5 friends, the 5 ascetics, at the deer park, they took one look at him and he put on weight and he looked healthy and they thought, you've given up, haven't you? You're not sort of striving anymore. But then his demeanor, how he looked and how he talked, was different, and that inspired them. When the Buddha gave them the teachings, the first teaching he gave them, what was the Buddha's first teaching? Middle way. Not Dhammacakka, before the Dhammacakka. It was not to avoid the extremes, which tire and weaken the body and mind. Atthakilamattanu yoga, and avoid the extreme of indulging the 5 senses. Karma sukkhadikanu yoga. It doesn't mean all indulgences. Indulgences of the mind, the joy of the mind. When the mind blisses out, do not avoid those. They are not dangerous. And in fact, I mentioned this earlier. What are the results of anybody who indulges in the 4 jhanas? What happens to you? Only 4 results, not a 5th. Those 4 results, stream meaning once returning, non-returning, or arahat. Pretty attractive, isn't it? You can have fun at Jhana Grove and go away at least a stream winner. Interested? Is my marketing campaign working? So anyhow, how they, that's why even though you struggled when I was young and did these stupid practices like these other monks, I have sat, all night before. Well, I shouldn't say this. Okay, I started all night before, but that was when you had some really good samadhi. Samadhi, stillness, when this time didn't have any meaning, and that was really good fun. Trouble is, if you've had some really good meditation, you've got all this energy afterwards. And I still remember these times when I had lots and lots of energy after deep meditation. We always had to do some chanting in the morning, much longer chanting, but pretty much the same type, yo so bhagawa. Are you getting bored with that chanting in the morning? Yo so bhagawa. But there are times when you just had a really good meditation, and then the chanting goes like this: Yo so bhagawa. People ask me, Ajahn Brahm, please chant softly. You can't. You've got too much energy. Whenever you do, woof. And that's one of the, I'll tell you all my secrets. Whenever any one of you comes up to me, and then there may be interviews and say you've just had a really deep meditation, a lot of times I don't look at what you say or listen to what you say, I look at how you say it. The emotions behind it, the power behind it. That's why, the old trick, I said this to a few of you earlier when you came up for, I think it was over in Bodhinyana Monastery. If any of you come up and say, you've just experienced a jhana, I'd look at you. These were some Americans who were here. And what did I say to you? I said, no, American women cannot experience jhana. You've heard me before, you know what I'm up to. I'm waiting to see what their reaction is. If they say, what? I thought you had equity and wisdom, Ajahn Brahm. You're just another of those oppressive male patriarchy monks. If you really get upset, okay, well, they can get jhanas, everything. Obviously, everyone can. But that's just telling me that you didn't have a jhana. If you have reactions like that, you can't do that after a deep meditation. It's impossible. But if you say, oh, okay, fair enough, then I look at you and say, oh yeah, it probably was a jhana, well done. You get the meaning of what we're doing here, and that's probably similar to what happened to the newly attained Buddha in front of his 5 first disciples. They looked, you're just indulging, you can't be enlightened. But then they looked at other things about him, and they said, oh, maybe you are. So just asceticism is no proof of enlightenment, or even having just emerged from a jhana. But your character and reactivity, and the kindness, the peace, that is a far more reliable indication. And so the first 5 disciples saw that. So, okay, maybe this is true. And that's when the Buddha had the opportunity to teach them, to show them, and they eventually became enlightened too. So, your bus and your bus driver is kind of sometimes even unacceptable. There's no bus driver inside there. I know there's a bus driver. I tell myself what to do. I tell myself when to sit, what to talk about. One of the other examples of what to talk about. Many years ago, in our Nolamara temple, this was before we built the main hall there. And I remember I was there for the weekend, and Friday night I'd given a talk about some subject, I'm not quite sure what. And I was looking in the library, you had cassette tapes in those days. And as I was just browsing our library, I saw I'd given a talk on exactly that subject about 3 years before. It had been recorded. And I decided, just as a little interesting experiment, to actually to see how my talk had changed or developed over the years. Again, this is no exaggeration. When I turned on the talk I'd given 3 years ago, there were whole paragraphs exactly the same as the talk I'd given the night before. No, hardly any word changed. And I'd been of the idea that I had decided what to say the night before. It was freaky. Goosebump moments. What's going on? Have they made a mistake? Have they got the date wrong on this talk? When I checked it a couple of times, word for word, some of those paragraphs. And I thought I was just doing it afresh. What you choose and what you do, actually your choice is far less powerful than you ever think. Eventually you find out it is just all conditioned. But anyway, that's getting to the front seat of that bus. It has huge consequences. You realize there's no one in here. You all know emptiness and non-self according to the Buddhism, but actually to see that and realize it, ooh, and see all these examples of that in your own life. So what's actually happened, so it's easy to just sit there and do nothing. That's my basic teaching. Can you do it? I can't do nothing. Exactly, no one can do nothing. It's better to say nothing doing. In other words, you stop and let things be. Put down the cup. Turn off all the controls. Bury the mouse of your computer so you can't control anything. Is that scary? You find you become really peaceful. If you have confidence, so many people don't have that confidence. So what they do is say, well, it's not working. I only tried for about 2 seconds. We're used to having control. Now once there was this person, this man, he was born in a jail, born there. But he was hard-working. He worked hard in his jail, and because of his hard work and all his studies, he managed to get a much bigger jail cell. And once he had a bigger jail cell, and he started teaching other prisoners about this work things, he met a nice female prisoner, and they liked each other, and they got married, and they got even a bigger cell in which they could share their lives together. And after a little while, they had a few little babies, and the kids grew up in the cell, and they thought their life was really nice. They had a nice big cell to live in, and good food, guaranteed, but they never realized they were in a jail because they were born in that jail. They spent all their life in the jail. Even the kids were in the jail. They thought it was really nice. And then one day when the prisoner was just looking around his cell, he found there was one of the floorboards was kind of loose. So he took it up and found under the floorboard of his cell there was a tunnel. And he looked at the name of the tunnel. He even had a name, the tunnel. It was called Eightfold Path. And he looked at who wrote this and what the instructions were. And there's a whole book of instructions. And it was written by this, what he thought was a prisoner, Zach Yamuni. Okay, this is not being disrespectful because it has a nice ending to it. And so he just wanted to explore this tunnel built by Zach Yamuni. And he gave him all the instructions. First of all, just understand the path, even before you start walking along it. And when you understand the path, you have that right view. The next thing you have to do is to make sure why you are traveling along this path. If you think you're going to find a treasure there or become a more wealthy, respected person, no, that's not the way. Make sure your right motivation Samma Sankappa is letting go, being kind, being gentle. Letting go. This is a pretty accurate translation of the second factor of the Eightfold Path. If you want to argue with me about it, please. But be careful, I've been studying this Pali stuff for years. So, it's like renunciation, letting go, and kindness and gentleness. The kindness thing was so important when I discovered that, because kindness was so important in any spiritual path. And when I was looking at the Eightfold Path, where on earth does it say about kindness there? Is there like samma metta, the right compassion, right metta, right loving kindness? There's nothing like that in there, but when you look at that second factor of the Eightfold Path and you look in there, the second factor, the second part of the Eightfold Path, it's called like avyapada. It's negative, it's opposite, no ill will. You look at how it was described, what that word actually meant, how people understood it. And that was with metta, loving kindness. The last of the three was gentleness, ahimsaka. So you all know ahimsa from Mahatma Gandhi, non-violence. So I can never understand why even some Zen monks would hit you over the back with a stick. Have you ever been to a Zen retreat? Any of you? Once when I was in Hong Kong, one of the reasons you go overseas, I must admit, because in overseas, in this monastery in Hong Kong, where I stayed and gave a little retreat, so many other visiting monks were allowed to come in. I wanted we tell stories to each other and get more material for my talks. And one of these Chinese Zen monks, when he came in, he spoke reasonably good English. He said that he heard, it's actually a true story, one of these big Zen retreats they were doing somewhere in mainland China, and during the retreat, the Zen master came down behind everybody, and there was one lady there was a bit sleepy, so he hit her over the back with a Zen stick. And he's supposed to do that. That's tradition. They've been doing that for years in Japan. And she hadn't surrendered her mobile phone, so as soon as she got hit with the stick, she got out her mobile phone, she called the police. And the police came and arrested that monk and took him away, and that was the end of that retreat. You're not allowed to do that anymore these days. So if you say, well, Ajahn Brahm, why don't you use the Zen stick? Now you know why. I don't want to be arrested. I thought that was really funny. Anyway, back to that gentleness. So you have to be gentle going down that little tunnel. And also you have to make sure, you don't sort of act improperly or speak improperly. If you speak too loudly when you go through that tunnel, someone will hear you, it will echo, and you'll get caught. And you have to have a good livelihood, while you're going down there, otherwise you get stuck. And it takes just the correct amount of effort to go down that tunnel. If you go too hard, too fast, the tunnel might collapse. You have to be very gentle. And, of course, you have to be very aware and mindful. There's many traps and booby traps down that tunnel. And if you're not aware, you get caught by them. And lastly, at the very, very end, you have to be very still. So he went down that tunnel after reading the instructions, followed the instructions, and he came out the other end of the tunnel. Oh, so beautiful and free. He didn't realize that such a place has existed in life. What he knew was the prison he lived in. He thought that was normal. Once he got outside of the prison, outside into the fresh, clean, free air, then he realized that how wise was this gentleman called Sakyamuni. He bowed 3 times to him. in honour, in worship of Sakyamuni. It was only the first stage of enlightenment, so he crawled back in to actually make sure he could tell his wife and the kids about this amazing tunnel to escape from, you know the name of the prison? Samsara Penitentiary. So that's one of those little stories. But anyway, I always wanted to know where that kindness was. And that's one of the reasons why, if I give you any instructions at all, one of the best instructions would be, in meditation, just be kind and be mindful. Nothing else. If I did have a third factor, be patient. A lot of people are very impatient. Sometimes I like it when people are impatient. This Singaporean gentleman came up to me one day and he said, "Look, I know you're," he said, "I'm a Buddhist, I know you're very wise. Can you please tell me what suffering is? Quickly." He had to go to work. A lot of times I mess up, but this time I got it right. And I told him, just made it up on the spot. Suffering is asking from this world something it can't give you. And he got that. Oh, that's really neat. Something he could remember he hadn't heard before. Asking from this world something it cannot give you. What do you ask for right now? I want jhana. The world can't give you that. You have to stop wanting, and then it comes to you. It arrives. Okay, I was going to tell this story until much later, but here it comes. This is the story of the donkey. Now, when I first told this story, it was a donkey and a carrot. But because so many people listen to this story were from Asia, I changed it from Malaysians to the donkey and the durian. For the Sinhalese, the donkey and the mango. What fruit do you like? Anyway, we're in Australia now, so donkey and the carrot. In the old days in Europe, they'd have donkeys pulling the carts. And sometimes those carts had people in the back. So the donkey was one of the best forms of transport. The problem was with donkeys, they were always really stubborn. They were lazy, they never wanted to do anything. So people had a stick and they tried to hit the donkey with the stick. And the poor donkey just would not move at all. It was very, very stubborn. And anyway, that's not the right way to use a stick on a donkey. Instead, you tie the stick to the back of the donkey's neck. Listen, this is really important. This is how you get deep meditation. Tie the stick to the donkey's neck, so the front of the stick is about 2 foot in front of the donkey's head. And on the end of the stick, you tie a string. On the end of the string, you tie a carrot. If you're from Malaysia, tie a nice juicy durian. If you're from, that's from Malaysia. If you're from Sri Lanka, a nice juicy mango. If you are from London, a nice piece of fish and chips. I don't know. I love making it up. If in America, what's your favourite food in America? Hamburger. You tie a hamburger in front of the donkey, it'll work. So the donkey sees the hamburger right in front of it. You can see it, can smell it. So what do you think that donkey does? It moves towards the hamburger. Doesn't matter what's behind the donkey in the cart. He's not concerned about that. He's just concerned about the hamburger. So the donkey moves towards the hamburger and pulls the cart with him. As he moves towards the hamburger, what does the hamburger do? It moves away from him. It's on the string, on the stick, tied to his neck. And so the donkey can see, smell, and already the saliva is coming out of the donkey's mouth. And so it starts to run as hard as it possibly can
after the hamburger and can never reach it. That silly hamburger is always about 2 foot in front of the donkey's mouth. Doesn't matter how fast that donkey runs, it can't get it. But then one day, the donkey goes past the Buddhist monastery. And the donkey hears how to catch the hamburger really easily. So what the donkey does, it's already been walking after the hamburger, never getting it. It can see it, smell it, imagine it, but can't actually get it. Have you ever had those experiences in life? Like success, happiness, the lottery numbers or whatever, they're just right in front of you. You go towards them and they go away. Even like nimittas are like that, aren't they? If any one of you who've got nimittas yet, you can see them, you go, oh, they're gone again. So the donkey now runs as fast as he can after the hamburger. He knows he can't reach it, but he runs anyway. And then the donkey does the Buddhist practice. Stops. Have you ever known that story of Angulimala? He said to the Buddha, he was chasing the Buddha to kill him, he said, "Stop, monk." And the Buddha turned around and said, "No, you stop, I've already stopped." Stopping is such a powerful Dhamma taught by the Buddha. And when people say you can go all over this world, there's many Buddhists practicing in places like Perth. Can you see any signs of Buddhism in Perth? Of course you can. Every crossroad which says stop. To me, I claim that as the Dhamma teaching. So every time you see that sign and you're busy trying to get somewhere, stop. Yes, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So the donkey stops. What does the hamburger do? Of course, because of momentum, it's been running really fast, the hamburger swings further away from the donkey. It's never been that far away before. Just like sometimes when I tell you how to meditate, you've been meditating years before, I say just let go, do nothing. You say, no, it gets worse. The donkey's got some confidence and faith. They've got much more patience than you guys have. Sometimes. So the donkey just stands there and sees the hamburger go further away than it's ever been before, 4 foot in front of the donkey's mouth. How's this going to work? Just patient. And then the donkey sees something which has never happened before. This is where this meditation becomes, wow. I've heard this, but now it's actually happening. The hamburger's coming towards you. It's swinging. As it gets closer to you, it gets faster and faster and faster. When it's at its usual place, 2 foot in front of your mouth, it's really coming at speed towards you. And it comes close. You don't do anything. You're just aware and make sure you don't interfere with the process. When nimittas come up, don't try and grab them and go, wow, this is amazing. No, shut up. The hamburger comes closer and closer, and it comes so close to the donkey's mouth that the donkey has to remember the most important part, the last instructions, are the kindness. You can never get enlightened without kindness. So eventually it comes so close to the mouth, then the donkey remembers the instructions. It says to that hamburger, "Hamburger, the door of my mouth is open to you." Have you seen how big donkey's teeth are? They're huge. And so you can imagine the donkey without the instruction of kindness just bounces off his teeth. I missed the chance. So that's a beautiful way of describing. All you need to do is just the kindness and the awareness, and maybe patience. So last time I talked about the 1,000-petal lotus. This is supposed to be the last part of the 1,000-petal lotus. I don't know, I may have to do a 1,000-petal lotus twice and 3 times. Part 2, Part 3, and Part 3b. But anyway, that soon, just watching this breath and it becomes delightful. You've gone deeper in to you, your body and mind. So the body's outside, it's gone a long distance away, you can hardly experience it. You see this beautiful breath, and inside the breath is a delightful breath. For those of you who really want to understand exactly what's going on, the reason why the breath is now delightful, beautiful, gorgeous, so easy to watch, it grabs you, is because it's now seen through the mind sense. Not the body sense. You have 6 senses, and the external senses, the external 5 senses are dropping away, and the mind is becoming stronger. So you can know, you're knowing the breath. You're not really feeling it anymore with your sense of touch. It's how the mind experiences it. And then that mind sense gets stronger and stronger. And how you're experiencing that breath as this beautiful, beautiful image of the breath in your mind, then that turns quite automatically into the nimitta. You now experience what you're doing. You're not looking for anything, or you're not trying to change anything. You're patient enough, it just grows into this beautiful light. That's most people. If anybody ever says, oh, the Buddha never taught that, that is in the Upakilesa Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya. And the whole sutta on what to do to make sure that those nimittas, are well looked after, and they can lead into what's going to happen next. Sorry. So your lotus is really opening up now. You see what's inside. And one of the reasons I love this story is to give you some confidence. I don't make these statements up. But the jhanas are right inside that nimitta. It's like sometimes you experience yourself falling into the nimitta, getting enveloped in it, and all the 5 senses are gone. Bye, baby, bye. And you're just blissed out of your head. You can't think when you're in those states of jhanas, but when you come out afterwards, you can't forget them. It's difficult finding words in English. The only word which is close, but has many, many failings to describe these experiences, is like trauma. Trauma you can never forget. It just takes the whole of the mind, and it leaves such an impression on you. But trauma is supposed to be negative. This is like positive trauma. You're getting the incredible mind states, the most powerful you've ever had, and of course you can't forget them. That's why afterwards you start interpreting them. You don't have to take photos of these things, in your mind, or take notes, what was this like. You remember that easily. Some of the most powerful experiences of your life, and of course you'll ask, what was that? And you can just turn your mind to it, and you can recall it easily. So, you go deeper into this nimitta, and deep into the nimitta, and the nimitta petals open up. I mean, they're really gorgeous. To think there can be something more than that, wow. And you get into the first jhana. What does the first jhana feel like? What are you experiencing at that time? What is the object which you're aware of? It's the first level of bliss. The sheer mental pleasure of this. What do I mean? Bliss. Please excuse me, but this is almost like a self-indulgence, no self-indulgence. That one of the descriptions the Buddha gave to that bliss, so you get some idea of how powerful it is. We called it Sambodhi Sukha. This is just what you are experiencing in that first jhana. It's only number 1. Sambodhi Sukha. And every time I look to that, is that some error or misspelt something? Because Sambodhi Sukha, Sambodhi means enlightenment. It's not enlightenment, there's much more to go. But Sambodhi Sukha you might translate as a taste of enlightenment. The joy, the bliss of enlightenment. This is actually what it feels like. And you're actually experiencing that now. If you've had a first jhana, you've experienced it, and then you look at how the Buddha described it, that's goosebumps, big time. That's how it feels. Just the first jhana, Sambodhi Sukha. Wow. But you ain't experienced nothing yet, mate. The second one is even more powerful than that. And how does the second one appear? Or how do you experience it? You have this beautiful Sambodhi Sukha, and after a while things become still, and you go into it. And the mind goes deeper in. And things which are on the outside, like this, I try to find words, and the word which I use for the difference between the first and the second sutta, and the first and second jhanas, is in that first jhana, it's kind of a wobble. You blister out of your head, but that changes slightly. All that's happening is, even though you've let go a lot and the five sense world is a long distance away, even so the bliss which you're experiencing, you tend to just hold on to it slightly, which means that you move away from that bliss. But it's not moving away, it's not strong enough to destroy that bliss. You get pulled in almost immediately afterwards, kind of a wobble. That is the vitaka vichara which the Buddha talked about. It's not thought. It's like pre-verbal. It's just the mind is not totally still yet, but almost. And of course, after a while that disappears. And you get the second jhana, which is really still. Much more still than the first jhana. And that's why, if you call this like concentration, samadhi concentration, it's obviously these words, translations don't make any sense. When you call it stillness, when there's no movement at all, not even any wobble, then that's called samadhi, stillness. And that's why they describe that particular flavour of bliss for the second jhana, samadhija, piti sukha. It's born of stillness, real stillness, powerful stillness. So still you can't do anything. You're out of the picture now. Your ability to control everything is totally gone. Will is not possible there in the second jhana. That's one of the reasons why I gave that simile of the driverless bus. It's usually in the second jhana you will see very clearly the driver's seat is empty. That which you thought to be your controller, your will, your choice, you see there's no one there. At the time, you're blissed out, you're so happy. You don't get scared in that state. When you come out afterwards, just the afterglow of these jhanas is so powerful. Again, you're not scared. Oh, that's interesting. You start to understand some of these teachings of the Buddha, of non-self. And what happens next? In this really still state, but then some of the other attributes to that second jhana, that type of bliss which you're experiencing, disappears. And a more refined bliss comes up. Sometimes we talk about that word piti sukha. And sometimes people can study those suttas and try and differentiate between what is piti and what is sukha. And basically people make a whole mess of it just through studies and thoughts. What you do experience is on your way into those jhanas, that you find out that the bliss of the second jhana, when you first experience that, it's the most bliss you could ever experience, and you think there can't be anything higher than this, deeper, more satisfying than this. Be careful, because there usually is. And that bliss is the third jhana. And in that third jhana, the piti is gone. You just have sukha now. And after a while, you look back upon those states, that's what that meant. And when you experience something like that, it does mean that you understand it's a waste of time even trying to figure out what's piti and what's sukha. Just let it happen by itself. And that thing which has just disappeared in bliss is a much more powerful bliss. This is the piti is gone, now you just have this wonderful sukha. And as you go deeper inside, eventually even that sukha settles down. And you have what they call upekkha. And for many years, as some of you know, it's supposed to be equanimity, but that is just too cold a term. To me, it doesn't fit. So many more people, I think, and I prefer the word contentment. Contentment is a much more warm, powerful feeling than equanimity. That's maybe me. It doesn't matter what you call it, you know what it is. And that's really still. 5 senses vanished. The 6th sense perfectly still. And that can last for a long period of time. And it's usually that state, you're so still you don't actually need much energy. Hardly anything at all. That's one of the reasons why usually in that state the breath stops. Actually stops, it's not just you're not aware of it, it's not needed at the moment. And you're perfectly healthy. And even the mind can be still too. It doesn't need to move. Actually, that's how it happens. It's more the immaterial attainments to come, but I mean, that's enough for this retreat. If you can just get the 4th jhana, I don't think you'll ask for your money back again. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, so if you do have some questions about that, oh fine, because it's important to actually understand it properly. But then also we've got so many other questions in the box. So anyway, I'll try my best this evening. And have a happy jhana time.